You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome to episode 1 of the DFO Rundown. I'm Jason Gregor, and we have the tanned man, Frank Saravalli, after a week off in the sun. Frank, clearly you went in the sun. Where'd you go? And what level of SPF did you use?
We escaped to Florida for a few days. Fantastic trip, but and my wife is on me all the time because I say my last name ends in a vowel. I don't need any sort of sunscreen. And every single time I come back, like, you know what it's like when you have kids, you're in the pool for like 10 hours a day, like the back of my neck. I wear the sun shirt when I'm in the pool. I know, like, I'm one of those guys, but like, you know what? No one needs to see me tarp off. So I wear the sun shirt. It protects me sun-wise. And the only thing that's exposed is the back of my neck. And it's like a leather belt right now. Like, it's just burnt to a crisp.
Well,
so I could probably
sunscreen on, dude. It's called like skin cancer.
Yeah, I should probably get on that, but I wear the hat and the glasses and I don't know, get in the pool and have enough tequila to fuel a Mexican cartel for a few days.
Well, there's nothing better than hanging out with the kids in the pool. It is very relaxing and nice. Gets you off your phone a little bit, which is good. But there's lots of hockey stuff to get to. We got to start, I think, with one of the more emotional games. I think it was one of the few times where you would have fans of almost any team rooting for the Vancouver Canucks after what they've gone through as an organization, coming back their first game with like a few days of practice. Almost the entire team had COVID, and Braden Holtby playing out of his mind in goal. And they come from behind to defeat the Maple Leafs last night.
What a ridiculous performance. I mean, at that point, 2-0, you could have just packed it in. You're the Canucks. I saw on Twitter, someone said that their lung capacity must have been like a bunch of octogenarians at the top of Mount Everest. 25 days off, such limited practice time, a lot of medical testing, a lot of guys that were severely ill, really needed some help to get back on the ice. And they down 2-0. They could have just said, hey, you know what? We were forced into this situation. We were dealt a bad hand. We're just going to, lay back and that's not what happened at all. I mean, you said it. You don't have to be a fan of the Canucks to appreciate that game. And Braden Holtby, what do you call that? The poke check barrel roll?
Windmill, man. I love the windmill save.
Yeah. So it kind of, I know it wasn't nearly the same scale or moment, but it reminded me exactly of that enormous save that he made. I guess it was game 1 of the Stanley Cup
against
final.
Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah. That was insane. So, Braden Holtby full marks, and, not to launch into a frankly speaking, but I know if you're not angry or your view isn't polarizing that it doesn't belong on Twitter, but like the reaction from Toronto Maple Leafs fans after the game, like they were immediately like, this is worse than the David Ayres game. I'm like, seriously? Like, your team had plenty of opportunities. How many more scoring chances do you want? Like it's not like they packed it in and stopped trying. Braden Holtby was excellent. And so, why the same sort of criticism? Does Braden Holtby not deserve a little bit more praise than David Ayres?
Well, Frank, emotional, quick, anger-fueled reactions happen on social media, but I think I saw lots of people be like, "Hey, man, like give the Canucks credit." And Braden Holtby, though, you're right. Like, what are they? 37 saves in that game, and many of them were like 5-star saves for sure. But the other news of the game, of course, was the Edler hit on Hyman. He might be getting a call for a suspension, although he did get kicked out of the game, and sometimes that plays a part in it. But I know after the game they were saying Hyman's smiling and was being all positive, but I'm telling you, they lose him for any stretch, man. He's a huge loss for that team. He's not Marner or Matthews, obviously, in skill set, but his consistent work ethic, that'd be a major blow to that team.
He's the heartbeat of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I don't care what anyone says about production from Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner or John Tavares or anyone. That team runs on the back of Zach Hyman and the way that he shows up every night. And I know they're now in a position where they've lost 4 straight, and people are all of a sudden questioning again this team and where they're at. But you're right, losing Zach Hyman for any period of time, if they had to, That would be a significant problem. And then moving forward, I think, if he were to be sitting out, it sort of gives you a window into what next year might look like pending UFA. What's Zach Hyman going to cost? He's the premier, in my opinion, the premier player in his role in the NHL. And it depends what you want to call it. Some teams call it a press player, a player that's just that hound on the forecheck that does everything right, that, feeds your top players the pucks and does all the dirty work required. He's the premier player at his position in the league. Jason, so what does he cost as he hits the open market? Is it 6? Is it 5.5? Like what? Like he's got to be in that window, I would think.
Yeah, I thought somewhere between like 4.75 and 5.5, depending on the team, right? I think depending on the team and depending on what they're looking for, what they have as far as cap space goes, because that's a lot of times what it comes down to is all it takes is one team that's willing to pay you more than the other teams are. And, there is a flat cap, of course, but he will be an intriguing player, no question about it, to see what happens moving forward. And speaking of seeing what happens, Frank, the East Division, you've got Boston, you've got Washington, you've got Pittsburgh, the Islanders. They all made these big moves. The Penguins stubbed their toe a little bit, but Buffalo's not going to be the easiest out here down the stretch. They're playing loose now. But
what a change in dynamic that's been, by the way.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, the sky is falling in Buffalo and has been for the last decade. And then if you check out Twitter now, again, not to put too much emphasis on a place that doesn't exist in real life, it's like sunshine and rainbows now in Buffalo again. Casey Middlestat, everyone's a believer now. What happened?
Well, wins, man. When you're so low, you just look for anything positive to see where it goes. But the Buffalo trade to Boston and then Ottawa, you look at Hall comes in. He's paid immediate dividends for them on their second line with Krejci. They seem to have some chemistry going with Smith right away. Riley comes in on the back end and has been very good. And then Curtis Lazar slides in, like 3 players fitting 3 very specific roles. And suddenly the Boston Bruins look incredibly deep.
Yeah, they do. And they're a team that, as they only continue to get healthier here, are going to be in an even better position, moving forward. It's so interesting the way organizations have a knack at putting players in the right positions. And it's interesting, I think a lot of people had just looked at the Lazar deal and they're like, why is he in the mix here? But I think Boston has this ability, and I feel like you touched on it in a recent pod. And if not, I wanted to expand on it. The idea that Boston produces 4th line players and players in that very specific role that play it just as well as anyone, that it's like they groom these guys, they put them in a position to succeed, and then they go and they get paid elsewhere. And then Boston has this sort of next crop of 4th line players that are just the ideal players that slide up, play well, get paid somewhere else. Noel Acciari, go down the list. There's been guys, over the years, the last 10 years, that they've done it better than anyone in that one specific position.
Yeah, they've been very good at it. And then, hey, when you have a former Hart Trophy, you can just winner who can just slide on your second line. And I think a lot of people incorrectly wrote off Taylor Hall because of what happened in Buffalo. If you looked at some of his underlining driving numbers, he's still kind of the same. He just wasn't finishing at all.
Right. Shooting percentage was what, 2%?
Couldn't score a breakaway to save his life. And then he kind of scored on a partial one in Boston. And, he's got points, I think, in 3 of the 4 games they played.
Are you saying the Sabres, by the way, are better without Taylor Hall?
No.
But why? How weird is that? So
they had won a few games. I never really buy into that. I think that's a real false narrative. It's like people that would say, well, wherever Hall went, they didn't win. I'm like, well, New Jersey hadn't won the playoffs in 6 years and he took them to the playoffs.
Right.
Arizona hadn't won anything in 7 years and they won a play-in round. So that narrative's kind of false.
I say it tongue in cheek, but it is interesting though. And again, this is a guy that maybe with all due respect to fans in Edmonton, Taylor Hall is now playing on the best team that he's ever been on.
It's not close.
by a country mile. So, what kind of success do the Bruins have? And then if Taylor Hall gets going, how much does that change the storyline around him? If, like you said, he can sort of regress back to the mean of where he probably should be with his underlying numbers.
Well, you wonder if Taylor Hall becomes the Phil Kessel of Boston, right? Because Phil Kessel, when he went to Pittsburgh, he made a huge difference. He could have easily won the Conn Smythe the first year in 2016. He was incredible.
I voted for him for the Conn Smythe that year.
Yeah, he should have won, in my humble opinion. But you look at Hall, who is, and Kessel was a top 10 scorer for many years. Hall's being a top 10 scorer 3 times in his career like that. You've got Pasternak and Marchand, and it's funny to look at how Bruce Cassidy runs that team right now. Now, I think part of it has to do with their condensed schedule, but you look at the minutes played, Frank, of every forward, like we're talking 12 to 15. Like Marchand's the one guy because he's penalty kill and the power play where he's up a little bit higher. But I was looking at their minutes played of all 4 lines the last 4 games, and it's pretty even. And that's a luxury that you can have right now when you're playing a ton of games. So fatigue might not even be a factor because you're not really running certain guys into the ground at all.
It's really important. I mean, these schedules are so insane. Like you look at the Vancouver Canucks, 19 games in 32 days. Like that's what they were facing. I know the Bruins are a bit different, but still that East division has certainly been jumbled as well. And their schedule is going to be nuts. I think that's the one thing to, you see when you talk about ice time, and I wanted to hit on this quickly, you see a lot of players complain, why am I not getting more ice time? Why am I not, forwards? Why am I not in the 19, 20-minute range? Yet they're still productive. And I think, isn't that the coach's ultimate goal is like, how do I get the most out of this player? Like, how do I get this player to score 30 goals while keeping him in the minute range that works for him and his game? And also in the grand scheme of our team, it's an underrated sort of aspect of coaching that I feel like we never talk about in the hockey world, that, it's always, why isn't this guy playing more? Like, how about you get your team to be as efficient as possible? And that's what seems like the balance that Bruce Cassidy, as you mentioned, seems to be striking in Boston.
Yeah, it's been a good start for them. Mantha's loving life in Washington with a lot of goals. So we'll see kind of what transpires there. The North Division has, Edmonton, Winnipeg battling for home ice advantage. You saw their head coach, Paul Maurice, speaking of ice time, he really tried to go with a hard matchup with Lowry against the McDavid line, and Scheifele just didn't play as many minutes in that game. And now it was their 3rd game in 4 nights, but I'm very curious now as we get into the stretch drive here, when teams, a lot of them know, who they're going to face earlier now more than ever in a lot of cases. And I wonder if we're going to see a lot more coaches really trying, even in the games they don't play those teams, putting in their certain matchups that they want. And it's something that I watch for down
a trial balloon, so
year.
To speak, like just to see how it works. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Because you watch how coaches try to create different line combinations in the last quarter of the season. Coaches that know their team's in the playoffs, and they look for, every line needs an identity come playoff time. You talked earlier about Boston. They're fantastic at creating an identity of a line, right? Curtis Lazar comes in, how the coach wants them. And most players really thrive when the coach says, here is your role. They put it in a box. These are your exact requirements. This is what we expect from you. And then the coach continually puts you out there. Guys, even if it's not the sexiest role, when it comes late in the season to the playoffs, we've seen so many players like transform and all of a sudden be like, okay, this is my role. And they're like, yeah, we're not scoring, but we're limiting goals. And it's like they're scoring goals, right? They get fired up. And I watch for that more so. And I think this year, I wonder if we see it even earlier, because you look out of the 12 teams pretty much know who's in, even 13, maybe 14. And a lot of cases outside of the top 3 teams in the Central, you kind of have an idea of who's going to play who.
I was going to say, so I think there's 2 divisions where seeding doesn't mean jack shit. And I would say one is the North, because I think those 4 teams are somewhat equal. Like, I don't think getting Montreal is any sort of benefit in the first round. We've talked about this. But the other one is the East. The East is so evenly matched. Yes. Like, I don't think one makes any difference from 4, but the other 2 divisions, the Central, you want to make sure you get in that top spot and have, 2 of those teams, the 2 and the 3, make sure that one of those obviously is knocking out the other, whether it's Carolina, Tampa, or Florida. You want that easy first round matchup, easy in quotes. And same thing in the West. Like, that's going to be nuts, those 2-3 matchups in the first round.
Oh, I think first place in the Central is the most valuable of any spot. Without question. Like
Yeah.
the Florida Tampa game on the weekend, Frank, I watched it and you could feel the intensity even through the TV a little bit. I was jacked for that game. And it's,
how have those two teams not met? I mean, I know the answer, how they haven't met, because the Panthers have stunk for the last 2 decades, but like, how awesome would that be just for like the game in general?
Yeah. Well, I think for fans in those two markets to get like, I firmly believe that rivalries, they really become a life of their own once they're in the postseason. And if you had Florida play Tampa in the postseason, finally, I think, the fans there would love it. It's close proximity. And it's something you could build on in the future because like Tampa's obviously been the top dog for a long time, but Florida's coming and Florida looks like a good team. And even without Aaron Ekblad, they haven't had a major drop off. It might happen at key times in the playoffs, unfortunately for them, but we haven't seen the drop off. And the Panthers to me have been very, very impressive so far.
I agree. And I think I've been waiting for that moment, and you talk about the drop off, go back to, episode 4 or 5 of the rundown where I was saying personally, and this is on me, I'm pointing to myself, that the Panthers were built on a house of cards. I looked at their schedule. I looked at Chris Driedger and his numbers. I looked at their first line and I was saying how's this one going to work? Like Carter Verhaeghe, is this real? All those things, have come together in a way that I feel like the Florida Panthers this year are the Vegas Golden Knights from the year that they broke into the league. There's something about that chemistry. And I'm curious to see now adding in a few pieces at the deadline. And this is something that the Toronto Maple Leafs and a number of other teams are going to have to go through. Boston seems like they're handling it well. How do they react now that you were playing well and you were on a roll, and now you're taking some pieces out of your lineup to then inject some new personalities and people? How does that work out in your room, chemistry wise?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. I'm loving this, the race down the stretch, or even though a lot of the teams we know are in, we just don't know where they're going to finish. So it makes the matchups really good. Let's get to our big guest of the day today, Chris Beaudry. I'm very much looking forward to this interview. It's brought to you by Jock MKT. Jock Market, of course, is a hybrid between fantasy sports and the stock market. You can trade shares of players in real time with other users, and prices are driven by the user trading activity. And of course, if a player gets on a roll, you want to buy low, baby, because then you can ride the stock up high. And if you want to try it out, of course, right now, go to jockmkt.com and use the promo code DFO20. You'll get a $20 deposit bonus to start playing. You'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah, we wanted to head in a different direction this week, Jason, with our guest. Let's talk about mental health. I don't think we talk about it enough. We have one day a year where we have Bell Let's Talk, and there's lots of different things that pop up where we want to have a conversation. And I think we need to keep that going throughout the year. So let's dive in and talk some mental health today. Our next guest on the DFO Rundown was the assistant coach of the Humboldt Broncos. His name is Chris Beaudry. And if you followed along with any of the Humboldt Broncos coverage, you've probably seen his face or heard his story. He was not on the bus that day. He lived actually closer to the rink that the Humboldt Broncos were heading to and decided to meet the team there. And that left him in a spot where, of course, he ended up is saving his life, essentially. He was then sort of left, as I wrote then at the time, to pick up the pieces. And so we're pleased to welcome in Chris Beaudry to the DFO Rundown. Chris, how you doing?
Doing good. How about you guys?
Really good. Thanks a lot for joining us. And yeah, so let's start there. And I it's perhaps overstating a little bit, but maybe not in terms of the impact that this entire thing, this incident and accident has had on you, not just you, but everyone in your community. And I said then that there was a chance, a reason why you were not there on the bus that day. And I think you found that sort of purpose in the work that you've been doing since the accident. Can you share a little bit with us what you've been up to since then, and the work that you've been doing just with mental health and awareness and everything else?
Yeah, I think a lot of originally I was focused on my own healing, checking out different healing modalities, be it from a naturopathic doctor to a homeopath, that soon that grew into working with the first online mental health class for high school students, and then is kind of blown up into some public speaking and podcasts and all sorts of one-on-one counseling I'm doing with folks. And it's really been amazing to hear thousands of people's mental health stories, and knowing that just offering my own story can help them heal on some level.
How has it helped you personally, just taking all the things that you went through? And if you haven't read Chris's story, it's incredibly deep, some of the things that you were asked to do in the hours and days after the accident. But to take a minute after all that happened to really stop and address exactly the grief that you were going through and you were feeling, to hit that head on, as opposed to letting it just linger.
No, as soon as the accident happened, I lost every single mental health tool I had. And I had thought I knew so much at that point. I had been sober for 4 years, had been focusing on self-development and things like that, that once I noticed how it was all gone, I had to completely put myself back together in a different way. And in that first year or two, that was the entire focus. And I kept seeing that I kept putting myself in a box. This is the only way I can heal. And that box was blown up, and I found so many different ways. And I knew if I didn't look at all this pain, that it was going to eat me up. And so I had to find many different ways to heal, be it sharing with other people, creating my grief group, public speaking, et cetera, that really started to set me free and made me a better person, and makes the interactions I have with people better. Because when I'm a better person, then I'm less of a dick when I interact with people.
Now, Chris, you yourself now are a counselor, correct? So you when did you go through, that whole schooling process?
So I'm not actually a counselor. I'm a grief and mental health supporter, but okay. I've been taking multiple non-college courses. Like, I've been working with Gabor Mate. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a doctor from Vancouver. He developed an approach called compassionate inquiry.
Okay.
And I'm training in that. I've trained in multiple different things, from Sadhguru's inner engineering through Don Miguel Ruiz, the author who wrote the 4 Agreements. I've trained with him a little bit. And those are the types of healing modalities that seem to work for me. And then I'm just sharing what those folks have learned with others. And there's an area of people that it works for, that stuff works. And those are the folks who come to see me.
Oh, I'd love to hear that, because I think overall in North America that we're maybe not as open-minded to healing and, really understanding our inner psyche and other stuff like that. And it sounds like that's maybe more of a path that you've gone down, and it really allows you to really look deep within yourself, and then also and help others do the same.
Absolutely. Like the first thing that I learned about was self-inquiry from Ramana Maharshi. And his biggest thing was asking, who am I? But for me, it wasn't that. It was, why am I hurting? Why am I hurting? And I knew that my thoughts created a lot of the pain. And now this process isn't fast. Even some of the things, I just healed some stuff not 2 weeks ago around the Broncos. I had this story in my mind. Whenever I seen that number 29, how pissed off I got. I was like, no, screw that. There's 30 people there. I'm hurting. What about me? I'm in pain. But that was just a story my mind kept creating and creating, because that was easier to feel left out and to feel angry than it was to feel the entirety of, I lost 16 people, boys that I love, friends that I love. And until I let go of that story, I couldn't process that grief fully.
Chris, how have you kept ties to the hockey world? I know in talking to you in the years since that you tried to get back into coaching at the junior hockey level, and maybe you just weren't feeling it, but have you been able to transition with some of the stuff that you're doing off the ice in this healing and apply that to the hockey world?
Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of public speaking with hockey teams, university teams, pro teams, and at the provincial level again. I've really enjoyed that because even after I originally quit hockey because of PTSD, I just couldn't handle coaching. And once I kind of got a footing again, I looked at how much I enjoyed helping many different individuals and how limiting myself to one team would only allow me to work with 20 to 25 young boys, where if I'm, call it a mental health advocate, it allows me to work with hundreds, if not thousands, of players, coaches, individuals on multiple different levels.
So who have you been helping in the last, couple years here? What are some of the teams and leagues that you've been talking to?
I worked with the University of Vermont in the NCAA. I worked with the Battleford North Stars. I've worked with 2 female teams out of Ontario, AAA hockey teams. I've been in discussions with the U of S. I've worked with the Winnipeg Jets, and there's other junior teams in there, but I forget.
So what do you think the reaction has been like? Have you found that, in terms of, mental health, and this is one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is, there's so much of a focus on specific days. Oh, this is, Bell Let's Talk Day, or this is, we need to talk about the Humboldt Broncos because this is the anniversary, or we need, everyone wants to put this in a box. And I think that's one of the issues that, as a society we face around mental health is that it's just compartmentalized and you put it over here and you say, oh, I'll pick that up again, when I want to think about that or when it's appropriate, even though it's going on all the time. Have you found, I'm curious if you found in working with all these different teams and levels, a different sort of openness as you've gone along? Like are college teams and junior teams and pro teams, do they all approach it differently? How have you found their receptiveness in terms of players and staff, in terms of addressing, this issue that exists, not just in the workplace, but, at home and at the rink everywhere?
Besides a resource capacity, I mean, when we look at pro teams, of course, they're going to have more resources. NCAA is going to have more resources than the SJHL. But I think you could toss all the resources aside and you have to look at it at an individual level. And it starts with yourself, absolutely. But then it starts with who's creating the environment there. Are you creating an environment to heal? And we could talk about this as a hockey team. We can talk about this at a grocery store staff level, or we can talk about it as a large corporation. Who are the folks that are there creating the conditions for growth? Are you looking that, wow, guys, you're playing hockey with us and we're together 7 to 8 hours a day. And through that 8 hours, the only focus is hockey? Or are we setting aside 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour a day where mental health is something that we discuss, or that we have the spaces available for you to go if you are triggered to process something? Because through the workday, I mean, between the three of us, do you get mad almost every day? Once a day? Does something get you and just grab you and you're like, and then you just hold it down? Let that be a resentment. I mean, anger is such an easy emotion to look at because healthy anger is clarity. It sets boundaries, it's subtle, and it's in the present moment. And if we deal with it then with that boundary offense and we just say, hey, whoa, something just doesn't feel right here. I think for myself, you may have overstepped here. Felt a little fear come in, or I've had some shame from something else in my past. It's dealt with, it's done. But when we don't have that safe enough space, when we don't know that we can't say those things, then we hold it in. It turns into a resentment. And the next day we get upset again and again and again, and that builds and builds. And then that anger comes out a lot of times at the places we do feel safe, at home, with our kids, with our spouses, with our friends. So that's why I say it starts at the top. It starts with coaches. It starts with board members. It starts with bosses, creating the spaces that are safe enough so that we can be with our emotions, not in an unhealthy way, but in a healthy way. Because unhealthy anger is resentment. Unhealthy anger hurts me and hurts you. But it's being with those in a healthy way at work, because that's where we spend most of our time. We don't want to take this stuff home if this is where it comes from. And we don't want to take our stuff from home to work, because at home we should have a safe enough place to deal with these emotions on a healthy level.
You know, Chris, I think especially specifically if we just talk in a sports team environment, I'm guessing that's going to be a challenge, because especially in hockey, and it's slowly getting better, but for the longest time it was all about the team, and that if you ever try to show your individual side, which might be fear, it might be frustration, it might be anger, that somehow that means you're not a team player. How have you been able to communicate that with people, that just because you focus on you at sometimes doesn't mean you're not a team player?
I think it comes back to, if you're focusing on yourself as an individual and you're being the best you can be, you're going to be a better teammate. You're going to be a better teammate on the ice. You're going to perform better if your mind's not stuck back in, oh, my girlfriend this, or my job that, or the interest on my credit card, or what am I going to do about college? If you've worked on those fears, you've worked with those emotions in a healthy way, you are a better teammate. But I think it also comes back to the stigma too, that we're coaches, we have to look at this as an individual thing. Sports are great. They're amazing, but they're not more important than someone's mental health. They're not more important than continuing a pattern that we know is going to affect a young man when he becomes a father and a husband and an employee. If we're continuing these patterns at that age, what are we actually doing as leaders and as coaches? Are we actually benefiting them if we're just teaching them how to do a net drive properly, or if we're helping them work with anger and shame and fear? That seems more like a coach to me. Someone who does that. The rest of it, the hockey stuff's easy. That'll do it, work itself out.
Do you look at coaches now, and I coach U9 with my son. It's like, it's just for fun, right? But it's about communicating to young kids, looking them in the eye, always encouraging when they do stuff. But do you believe that part of, because I've done some of the coaching clinics, right? And most of it is a lot about technical stuff. And then some of it's, there's a very, you kind of gloss over what I like to call headlines, and it headlines the stuff about, you ask a child this or that. Do you think there needs to be more of a structure in Canadian sports on coaches? And then if we had better resources for coaches to be better communicators, that eventually that would actually help the kids, because if the coach knows how to communicate with the kids and he knows how to do the technical stuff, the kids are probably going to enjoy it more. And that becomes a safe haven for them. Conversely, where if it's like, well, hey, you know what, I'm here, you do what I say because I'm the coach, and there's no real gray area.
I think I think the training is important, but I think also it relies on the coach to have the want to look at his own stuff, to be the change you want to see. And now, especially when you're getting higher level coaching and you're with players day in, day out, when you're looking at the AA and AAA programs too, and you are as much of an influence as a child's parent, if you're not working on your anger, I mean, we know all the coaches, the trash can throwing and the freakouts and what that, and they're looking at you still at an age where their brain's developing, where they're continually learning new habits. And this is the stuff we're teaching. And we got to check in with ourselves. And can we be the change we want to see? If you got a team that's got an anger problem, let's look here. If you got a team that has a fear problem, let's start here. Let's start there. Work on your own anger. Work on your own fear. And hopefully Hockey Canada can have some resources, have some things available, because when the coach is showing that, that's where those young guys are going to learn those new patterns from.
Quickly, Chris, what was, when you got back into coaching, you said you had PTSD at first and it didn't work, but now it's worked a little bit. What was some of the fears you had as a coach that you felt maybe you projected on players, and then you had to look within, and that made you a better coach?
I had such low self-esteem about myself my whole life. I found that most of my life I've been living to try and please my grandfather and my father. That's why I wanted to go to the rigs when I was younger. It's why I started farming originally. And that I kind of projected that fear onto players. I knew I hadn't played at a high level. So whenever I was questioned, I would get angry, and it would be something along the lines of, I spent 5 hours looking up this. I don't care if you're a player. I freaking know this more than anyone else. And that continued even after Humboldt. And I remember explaining something at a video board. If I didn't have everybody's full attention, I would just go into a state of panic and fear that I'm no good. I'm a loser. I know nothing. You're a piece of crap. You're never going to recover from this. Just go home and kill yourself.
How did you ultimately work your way through some of those feelings?
It started not looking at the hockey side of things. It started looking, and this is what Gabor Mate's work helped me with. It started looking at that kid, that 5-year-old. Why did I need to impress my dad? Why did I create this belief system or this coping mechanism at such a young age? And my dad, like I said, he's worked overseas or worked away on the rigs most of his life. And it started with me at 4 and 5 years old, trying to impress him so he would stay home, because I just wanted a dad who was at home, that wasn't gone all the time.
Yeah.
And so every time he came home, I'd try something different, and I'd try something different, and they never worked. And then my mind, a 5-year-old doesn't understand what's happening. So I create this idea in my mind, well, the dad must not love me because I can't get him to stay. But if I try harder, I can get him to love me. And that's what played out. That same type of scenario, not the exact same thing with players, but it's closely tied enough that my self-worth was tied into how I thought about myself, that it just continued to play out until I actually looked at that and could understand when this coping mechanism was coming up. And instead of resisting it and fighting back with anger, I just met that compassionately and said, yeah, I see that 5-year-old Chris there. I know that this is what you're doing to try and make us feel better, but it doesn't work anymore. That doesn't work. We have to sit with how upset you were at 5 that your dad was gone all the time. That just like with the Broncos in 29, how that kept me from feeling the grief of everything. This coping mechanism was easier to feel that my dad didn't love me than to feel the pain of him leaving every 2 weeks to work.
Did you have that conversation with your father? Was that part of the healing?
Yes. Now, originally I didn't have to. For part of the level, I just could do it in my mind. I could sit down there as 35-year-old Chris and talk to 32-year-old dad and talk to 5-year-old Chris in my mind. And that was the beginning of the process that then gave me enough confidence and self-worth again to sit down with my dad. And with him, it was no big deal. He was like, really? I didn't know that. Why would he? I'd never said anything about it. I didn't have this. I wasn't able to at 5 or 8 or 15. And it wasn't as scary, nowhere near as fearful as I thought it would be.
And now that you've had a chance to process, some of that and a lot of the other things that have happened, curious how you think you're a different person since the accident.
Oh man. When I coached, I talked about selflessness and I talked about intentions and doing things the right way. But before the accident, I was still so very self-centered. It was about my goals. I knew that coaching in a selfless way would help, but it was about me getting to the WHL or to pro hockey. That was still the main driver, where now my continual work is to constantly not have myself in the driver's seat, that I do things for other people, because in the end, I feel my best when I'm helping others, when I'm serving other people. I mean, even we'll give you guys just a small example. Think of a promotion you got, or the new car you bought, or the last time you went for a nice dinner, and how that made you feel then, and how it makes you feel today. And now just think of a small service you done, like holding the door for an old lady, how that made you feel then, and how that made you feel now. And to me, I still feel the same today when I do an act of service for someone. In all those other accomplishments, the day I was hired by Humboldt, I don't feel the same today as I did then. And those acts of service last. And that's what I want to do. That's why I look at doing things out of service, because those last. Those good feelings stay.
Frank talked earlier about the anniversary, and of course it was earlier this month, Chris. And I know sometimes the word has a negative connotation. So I definitely, at least on social media, the word triggered. But is it still a highly emotional time for you when it comes to April 6th, or have you been able to understand what you're feeling, at the same time, mourn and embrace those emotions that come, I would assume, on the days around it?
Absolutely. I think that triggers are a good thing. Triggers are the doorway to healing. And this year was the first year I was actually able to be in Humboldt for the anniversary. And yeah, the day does carry emotions, but I don't try to make it that specific. Like if something comes up, I want to be with it when it comes up. But luckily enough for me, there was stuff that came up on the morning of the 6th and the evening of the 5th. That was a lot of this anger around that story I'd shared off the start. And then when I was able to process that through the day, when I went to Humboldt before we all went to the church, I was able to work with that anger, release it, and just to be able to be with the family members who were left. And it actually became a bit of an enjoyable day to just visit with everyone.
I know you weren't on the bus, but of course you came upon the crash. And I read Caleb Dahlgren's book recently, and he obviously doesn't remember it. I've talked to Tyler Smith a little bit about stuff, and everybody has different memories of that. You weren't involved in the crash, but I can't imagine what you saw at that time. How were you able to heal that? Because I would think there was probably some guilt for a while. You're like, geez, I should have been on the bus. Maybe I could have saved him. I'm not sure. But how have you been able to handle, that aspect of it? Because I think you're very accurate when you say, I could see why you felt like, hey, there was 30 of us. And then there was more because there was, some parents who showed up at the time. How have you been able to deal with all of that?
I'll go with the first question first. I never felt any guilt around it because all year I had drove to those games, the Melfort, the Yorkton, the Nipawin, just because of location wise, that's what we did. And after a game, I could get home and cut video and have everything ready for Darcy and Mark before they got off the bus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it really improved our efficiency. To deal with the on-scene stuff, that was some of the first things I had to do, and that was with my homeopath is also a therapist, and it took a long time. Like some of this stuff isn't a week, 2 weeks. This was a year and a half, where I noticed my mind almost broke in that moment. Like all I could see was all these sod bags that were close to the color of our hockey bags, and I couldn't understand why we had so many hockey bags in the field. That's all I could think in that probably first 20-30 minutes was, why do we have this many hockey bags? And until I allowed my mind to let go of that idea, to sit with that shock, a shock was so heavy. It took 9 months to not feel like I was a walking zombie, of just slowly visiting this in a safe way, those emotions. And it might have only been 2 minutes at a time, 90 seconds at a time, just whatever I could handle. And I would go see my homeopath once every 2 weeks, and we'd just dive a little bit at a time. And it was continually working that process where if I didn't and just stayed back, I'd still be in that walking zombie clouded state. But it was me knowing I didn't want to live like that. I wanted to heal.
What were you asked, for those who maybe don't know the story, Chris, what were you asked to do in the days and the day of and the day after the crash?
I was asked to go to the hospital and start identifying boys that were coming in. And I did that. And that was difficult enough in itself, because with some of the injuries, some people it was hard to tell who they were. And then I started to beat myself up. I started to tell myself, you goddamn loser, you've been with these kids every day all year. You don't know who they are. They need you right now. You're no good. And then at 5 a.m, the coroner called me and asked me to come to the funeral home to identify the bodies. And that was, again, another thing that took a lot of time to heal. One of the main things they said right when I walked in was, Chris, we don't have enough time here, that we can't stop working on these people while you identify them. So there were some sounds and some sights that didn't leave me for months.
When you go, Chris, to start processing through that, and you said, okay, we'll take 90 seconds here or 2 minutes here. What is that like? What's that release like? What emotions are you feeling? I'm sure it's different every time, anger, whatever it is. But what are those minutes like?
A lot of it was fear at first, just sitting there and allowing myself to pretty much convulse and shake and weep, because I remember saying this so often and to my wife and to my homeopathic counselor, that I feel like I'll die if I feel this all. And they'd say, you're starting now, we'll stop whenever you're not safe. And so I would just sit there and scream, cry, yell, weep, whatever it may be. And just until I felt like I was almost going to white out, like blank out. Then I'd stop, and that was it. That was it for the week. Then the next time, a month later, 2 months later, maybe it was 3 to 5 minutes. Maybe I could start having a deeper conversation about it. And that's when my grief group showed up, was where we could sit around and I could tell you guys the same story I just told. Like the first time I talked about the morgue, I was just shaking and crying, and there was nothing I could do but shake and cry. Then the second time, maybe it was just shaking. The third time, maybe just my knees rattled a little bit, until I finally have processed that enough where I can tell it now that it's not just a story, because it did happen, but there's not as much emotion attached to it. It's used as a service. I use it in a way to try and help people now.
But it's got to be painful, though, to bring yourself there, like to know that you have to go there in order to get to the other side. Like, how do you bring yourself to that point?
For me, I knew that when I went to AA, how painful that was, to say that I manipulated my parents, I manipulated my family, I physically hurt my sister and my wife when I drank. How painful that was to say. But once I did that, the benefits were endless. They were absolutely endless. And I knew that the same process would work in this, that once I started to feel some of the sadness from the Broncos, some of the fear from the Broncos, it was the same as once I started to feel some of the anger and the shame from my alcoholism, that I would start to become a better person. And that was that dangling carrot waiting for me. That I seen that carrot through all that fear and through all that pain. And I knew that I had to process it, because if I didn't, I knew where I was going. I was going back to booze. I was going back to pills. And that is not what I wanted.
That to me, it's so interesting listening to you, Chris, today and reading Caleb's book, where both of you, had to deal with trauma prior to this, dealing with your own, recovery over alcoholism. Like that takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage. And, I wonder, dealing with that yourself, did that somehow strengthen you, because that allowed you to maybe process this better, because you'd been through a pretty hellacious road yourself prior?
Yeah. I mean, even the previous bus accident I had been in with my senior hockey team, where we had some people die, it gave me a level of awareness to actually process some of the pain. And then the addiction stuff gave me tools. Like I said, I lost every single one I had, but going back to AA, having supports already in place that I could lean on certain people, that helped me find new mental health tools, find new ways to grieve, find new ways to process things. And along with, all the folks who reached out, that gave even more tools and more support that helped. But having that foundation and that understanding that, as painful as it is today, once we move through this, life gets increasingly better. That gave me a tremendous amount of hope. And if there wasn't that hope there, I don't know where I would have ended up.
How often are you in communication with the other survivors? And how much do you lean on them and vice versa?
I wouldn't say I lean on them so much anymore. Early on, Christina and I, so Darcy's wife, we talked for hours a day, texting back and forth. We would be texting each other at 3 or 4 in the morning. and we were great supports for each other. I'm still in contact with her quite often. I probably talk to Fisk, Shooms, Smitty, and Patter the most, and that's probably bi-weekly or monthly. And then I try to reach out to everyone, the families, and all the other players every few months, every couple times a year.
Which is kind of normal for any team when you think about guys that you played with. I do want to go back quickly to your bus accident on the senior team. When did that happen? What transpired there?
In 2011, I was coaching the NACM senior hockey team, and we had booked rooms at the Imperial Hotel. And it's the first time in Imperial's life that they've been double booked at a small town bar. And so we had finished playing a game and we said, well, the closest place to stay is the city, because we had to go east of Saskatoon the next day, west of Saskatoon. So we go back, we're driving to the city, and just before we get there, the one young fellow on the team who was driving wasn't comfortable driving in Saskatoon. So we pulled over to switch drivers, parked the bus on the side of a 2-lane highway, and put the flashers on. I got up to stand at the door to say, open the door, we got to go to the washroom before we switch. Before I finished my sentence, a car hit us from behind at 130. The people in the car were killed instantly. Everyone on the bus had minor to major injuries. Myself, with the most major, I had compartment syndrome in my right leg, and I needed stitches on my head in a few places.
Wow, I hadn't heard that. Like, you've lived quite a life, Chris. And some people, and I don't know how spiritual you are or not. Some people always say, hey, they only give you so much that you can handle. Do you aspire to that? Do you think that's accurate, or you're just like, nah, I think I've had enough to for my lifetime right now?
No, I think that the human capacity is that of one that wants to heal. That what I have in me, everyone else has in themselves. So we all have that innate ability to heal. It just depends on if we want to or not. Now, I think it's the most beautiful thing to see, to look around the world, and there's tragedy every day, and to know that people every day, day in, day out, heal from their pain. People heal from child abuse, from physical abuse, from tragedy every day. And we all have that same capacity. No one person has any less. And to me, that gives a lot of hope.
I guess, Frank, you got anything else, or we want to get to rapid fire?
Yeah, Chris, I just wanted to, ask you about your future plans. Like what, I know you're a farmer, and we talked a bit before going live just about, just all that farming takes up and all the work that goes into that. But what do you want to do? Like Chris Beaudry, 5 years from now, what are you going to be doing?
I love the public speaking. I absolutely love it. I want that to expand to something much larger. I hope that we can start doing it live again, and in schools, in communities, at large corporate events. And I also want to expand my one-on-one support, healing, whatever I call it. I probably might go and dive into university in a couple of years when I finish some of the courses I have, just so that people can, I know there's some folks that unless you could get their session wrote off by health insurance, that they won't come. So I want to have that made available for some people.
Awesome. Well, Chris, we always like to end with rapid fire, which is just some quick questions, a little bit more lighthearted. I know this has been a very serious conversation, and I really appreciate it. So I want to end with some laughs as well. I know you can be serious and have a sense of humor. So here we go. The only rule is you got to answer honestly. Okay. Number one, of course, what is your favorite non-alcoholic drink now?
Chai tea.
Ooh, why?
I didn't drink caffeine before when I drank alcohol, and I like the little boost from it. It's warm. Yeah.
Okay. What was your best skill set as a hockey player?
Hitting people, because I had no hands and no feet.
What would be the best book you would recommend for someone who wants to start the journey to better mental health?
The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
What resonated with you the most about that book?
That everything was my thoughts. That a lot of my pain was created with my mind.
You have, I think you said something like 45,000 acres or 20,000 acres, whatever it is. What is your favorite crop and why?
Canola is the easiest one, I think, to seed. It's the most adaptable and the most profitable.
If you could only have one type of cow to breed on your herd, would you have Angus, Hereford, or Simmental, and why?
I would probably go with Angus because the quality of beef, even though the calves or the mothers are nuts when they calve.
It's true. We have one at a stubby at my farm right now. My mom can't go in the pen because she will run her over, but only for a week after she has her calf. The rest of the year she's fine. But then she kind of goes like Frank when he doesn't get a coffee in the morning. So it's not good. And one last one for you. What is your favorite minor hockey barn, excluding Humboldt, of course, that you've played or coached in Saskatchewan, and why?
It's got to be Nacum. I mean, Nacum is the best rink around. Frank's seen it. It's just cool enough that you don't get too warm. The boards are good. The net's good. The ice is good. Their dressing rooms are good. Yeah, Nacum where they make them.
Make them where they make them. Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much, man. That's an inspiring interview. I really appreciate you joining us today on the DFO Rundown.
Hey, and Chris, I wanted to see if you could spell out your email for listeners if they'd like to contact you. Chris, you are one of the most welcoming people. I'm proud to call you a friend. And I know that anyone that listens to the DFO Rundown that wanted to reach out to you, you'd be happy to engage them in a conversation. So, share your email with everyone.
For sure. It's cbeaudry@sasktel.net, which is C, B as in Bob, E as in elephant, A as in apple, U as in umbrella, D as in dog, R as in rhino, Y at sasktel.net.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that up on the screen too for Tyler in post-production. So thanks a lot, Chris. We really appreciate it. Continued success. We'll have to touch base again and just see kind of where your path is going in the future.
Thanks, boys.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris Beaudry, fantastic big guest of the day, of course, from jockmkt.com. Check it out. You want to get in on some players right now who you think is going to be riding high to the playoffs. And of course, you can play all their sports right there. They're big into golf. So yeah, if you want to do it, check it out and use the promo code DFO20 to get a $20 free deposit to start playing. Frank, it was great week. Chris Beaudry, that I loved his honesty, his frankness. I think that's going to help a lot of people just to look within. I loved his advice on, when people get angry, because, you earlier referenced social media. I think that's probably the time where most of us get angry more than ever. So just walk away before we reply. And I think we'd all be better off. At least myself. I can speak for myself for sure.
100%, but also to recognize that, that's what struck me the most about our conversation is to know that you have sort of all those things going on, but then to want to address it and have it come out. It's so much easier. And I know I do this myself. I'm sure a lot of us do it, where you sort of pack it away. You have things going on, trauma, whatever it is that you've been through, that it's in the recesses of your brain, and the human body and spirit is an amazing thing because, you're able to put that away and maybe you think that it doesn't affect you, but it's probably going on behind the scenes. And to get to that space where you want to bring it out and talk about it, not easy to do, and certainly not easy to come on a podcast and share it. And we didn't even really get to talk hockey with Chris, but he's just an unbelievable guy in terms of, the dedication that he had coaching that team. He touched a little bit on the hours of video that he put in, but coaching a junior hockey team on a somewhat volunteer basis, those people are the lifeblood of our game. And I know in talking to him, one of the hardest things that he had to do was talk to the parents of the kids and players who had passed in the accident, just saying, look, it was my job to protect your son. And I felt like a failure that I didn't do it. It's amazing what these volunteers and people, the time they put into helping grow the game for players that, aren't on a path to the NHL. And so lots of youth hockey coaches, thinking of all of them as we talk about this stuff.
Yeah, it was really fantastic. And I think a lot of people are going to join. I want to thank Chris again. A busy week, Frank. We got a GM coming up on episode 22 on Friday. So we look forward to that. Stay safe, get some aloe vera on your neck, and we'll talk to you on Friday.
Sounds good. See you then.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Saravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.